and welcome to this special episode of the Med versus the Caribbean.
Yep, and we'll say from the start, we have done pretty much a full lap of the Med, but we haven't done a full lap of the Caribbean, so there's more to see. Opinions might change, but people have asked for this, so we thought we'd give it a go.
We have set out 10 categories, so I hope we cover most of the things you'll be interested in, and we're going to score the Med and the Caribbean out of 5 for each category.
And we'll start with sailing, which I think the Caribbean's probably going to win. The thing about sailing in the Caribbean is there's always wind.
Yeah, I think there's just a little bit much today, but you can always sail. That's definitely the case, unlike the Med, where you're lucky if you get, I don't know, a couple of hours.
Yeah, here it's been pretty much the same wind since we got here, so about 3 months.
Yeah,
20 knots
whoa.
from the east.
Woo!
A little bit more. Yeah, we're wet now. The Caribbean is champagne sailing with the foam, but quite frankly, a bit of spray just cools you down. This is very predictable sailing. With the wind almost always from the east, you're virtually guaranteed a reach up and down the Windward and Leeward Islands, and a sleigh ride through the Antilles and the Bahamas if you're heading for the States. The only downside is if you want to come back, it'll be an upwind battle.
In the Med, winds can come from any direction, sometimes all in one day. Passage planning is a nightmare because if the wind drops, you either have to motor or get stuck for days.
Well, the wind's gone, but swell certainly hasn't. We're heading towards this island stroke rock. I don't think there's really any shelter in it. I think we're either going to have a very rough passage, keep going forward, or turn back and come back where we came from. You'll be wise to get acquainted with the various winds across the Mediterranean. They all have names. In the Western Med, the easterly wind is called the Levanta. If you're passing Gibraltar, look out for the banner cloud and watch out for the downdrafts. Meltemi in the Aegean is another local wind that held us up in Greece for several days. Long passages can be more tricky here, as the wind often dies at night. Just a matter of dragging the clue out the right side, and then the wind will get it and take her away. So with 20 knots of wind every day, you might expect top marks for sailing in the Caribbean, but I want to mark it down, to be honest, because it's controversial, but I find it boring.
Okay.
It's boring. It comes from the same direction all the time. You do nothing. Put the sails up and that's it.
Some of us are okay with that. But, okay, so if you're not going to give it a 5, what are you going to say, 4?
Yeah, just a 4, I suppose, yeah.
And the Med, I would say probably 2.
Yeah, I feel a bit mean giving it a 2 because we've had some pretty good sailing in the Med.
We have.
But yeah, on the whole, it's not great.
Okay, so 5 to 2 so far. That kicks us off. And the next category is diving and water sports. The biggest activity in the Caribbean is diving and snorkeling. Here in Curacao, we have a sunken tugboat just over the hill. It's been great. Bonaire too was amazing. Fish of every conceivable colour. And we saw turtles in the Grenadines. If you're into kite surfing or just surfing, the Caribbean is great for this too. In the Med, on the other hand, most of the fish are in fish farms, and we saw lots of those on our travels. The water was fantastically clear in Sardinia, for instance, but hardly a fish to be seen. The overfishing that's been going on here over a number of years means there really aren't many fish left in the Mediterranean, except dolphins, of course, and they always make my day.
So no surfing inside the Med, but the Portuguese coast of the Algarve, just outside, does pretty well. And there are localised spots within the Med that can be relied upon for wind, usually. But actually, the thing the Med has over the Caribbean is its calm. There's no real point in having a sup on board in the Caribbean, but in the Med, they're excellent.
So the Caribbean wins hands down in that category, I would say, and it's such a shame that there are no fish left in the Med, because that wasn't always the case. When I was a kid, you could snorkel.
Yeah, it's definitely got worse. So we're definitely giving the Caribbean a 5,
We
aren't we? It's not perfect because it's actually too warm quite a lot of the time. The water, it's so hot outside, you want a refreshing dip, which you can get in cooler water. You don't get it here. It's still warm, but I'm picking now.
You are. So we're going to be a Caribbean the 5, and I think the Med 1. Sorry.
Yeah. Shame to give the Med 1 because other things like going out in the dinghy on flat water is very nice. Here you get wet every time you go out in the dinghy because it's even in the protected waters here in Spanish water. It's so windy you just get splashed.
Right, moving swiftly along. The next category is marinas, and it's a difficult one for us because we don't use marinas that much, but when you have to, you want them to be good quality and cheap, cheap as possible.
Affordable, yeah.
We begin this category in the Caribbean, where we lifted Fair Isle in Trinidad at a good price. We did our own work, but there are some excellent craftsmen in Trinidad, so if you need help, you're in the right place. Trinidad is outside the hurricane zone, so lots of boats stay here for the season. We wouldn't recommend leaving your boat inside the hurricane zone. There are obvious risks. This is Tyrrell Bay in Carriacou after Hurricane Beryl blew through. Even if you stay on your boat, it is tricky to get insurance between June and November. Our insurance stipulates we stay south of this line. There are good marinas all over the Caribbean, though some are a bit pricey. But really the best thing about marinas in the Caribbean is you don't really need them. In the Med, most people do need to stay in a marina during the winter, and the place we liked best for that is Certosa Marina in Venice. It's a fantastic place to visit by water, and the price is good at around €800 a month for a 15-metre boat.
Do be aware though, it's very rare in the Med to have a pontoon to dock against, like this one in Certosa. So do make sure you hone your docking skills to Med more in some of the tight spots. And get some gloves for the ground lines. We call them slime lines for a reason. Our last winter in the Med was spent in Porto Montenegro. What a place this is. Set in a beautiful fjord-like bay. Ancient towns, great walking. A ski resort on your doorstep with a free ski chalet for marina guests. And something we started, which I think is still going on. Wednesday night curries in the clubhouse.
We also enjoyed a winter in Turkey, but prices there are rocketing. €2,000 a month for a 15-metre yacht is not unusual. Prices in most European countries are also going up, along with demand, so you'll need to book early. You can find deals in Spain. Cartagena has a lovely marina by the town. That's around €1,000 a month in low season. In high season, you can be quoted absurd amounts, €300 to €400 a night in Mallorca, for instance, where demand is high. That's fine if there are 10 of you on a charter, I suppose, but not something most of us can afford. So it's the price really that swung it on this category, and the Caribbean wins with 4 and the Med 2.
Yeah, just pay attention to local knowledge. People will give you a good steer normally on where to go for good services, really, if you haven't work done on your boat especially.
And the next category is the weather, and this really is a matter of opinion. We can't agree. I like the hot weather in the Caribbean. There's a breeze nearly all the time, rain sometimes, and if you stay away from hurricanes, you can have a relaxing life swimming and hanging out. What is more tricky is hiking and visiting places during the summer because it really is too hot during the day.
The rain has stopped, but now we're just wet from sweat because it's very humid.
And not just during the day. Nights on board can be oppressive too. We've had problems with our fold-out solar panels, so haven't had the power reserves for air conditioning. I've fitted extra fans, but you'll find you're often still sweating after the sun has gone down. In the Med, you get hot days in midsummer, of course, but usually just a few weeks of heat. At these latitudes, you get long, cool evenings. The wind doesn't blow 24/7 either, so you usually have a calm and beautiful anchorage to enjoy. It's altogether a more relaxing experience. So I wouldn't count myself as someone who doesn't like hot weather. I really thought that I'd come here and think, yeah, having proper summer all the time would be great, but it's just too much. There's too many things that it stops you doing for me.
Okay, so we have the score, and the Caribbean scored 3 and the Med scored 3. That's how we resolved that particular one. Now the next category we do completely agree on, and it's food. In the Mediterranean, each country is proud of its cuisine, and rightly so. So proper tapas, proper bar with meat hanging up and sherry. Love the sherry. And here we are. We're in Granada. We love Spanish tapas, Turkish breakfasts, going out to restaurants with family and friends pretty much everywhere. Food is part of the culture here. It's grown and farmed here. Local wines and beers add to the variety and rich heritage of food and drink. In the Caribbean, not so much. Not at all in our experience so far. We cheer if we find a good supermarket, even though the prices are twice what we pay in the Med. When we try to buy fruit and vegetables from local markets, it's still costly. Coconuts and pineapples are great, but on the whole, the food quality is poor. And don't get me on the restaurants. We have found a couple of good ones, but again at ridiculous prices. And on the whole, the food is just tasteless. One notable exception, the doubles and sahinas in Trinidad are not to be missed. Get there early in the morning before they run out.
Mango sauce, cilantro, cucumbers and coconut.
So a bit of a walkover then, that one.
Yes, it is. The Mediterranean scored 5 and the Caribbean 1. Do not come here for the food, guys,
No,
really.
It was lucky to get a 1.
Yeah, it was not good at all.
No.
Now, the next category is land excursions and culture. We like exploring on land, and some of our best days have been visiting the historic sites of Delos in Greece, or Ephesus in Turkey, or Cappadocia, also in Turkey. Venice has always been my favourite city in the world, and still is. Being there during lockdown was special. And there's more. The mosaics of the Alhambra, the amphitheatre in Cartagena in Spain, all add to the richness of sailing life. It's quite incredible, isn't it? 7,000 people could sit here.
And it's not just the ancient monuments. The towns and villages are lovely. And there's diverse sites and interesting architecture from country to country. We constantly comment on how lucky we are to have the views we do from our anchorages in the Med.
In the Caribbean, there are some sights, waterfalls in St. Lucia, seeing the scarlet ibis in Trinidad, and all the amazing art in Curacao. No doubt as we travel more in the Caribbean, there will be other towns and cities we want to see. So based on our experience so far, we've scored the Caribbean 1 and the Mediterranean 5, but I think this is one where the more we stay here, I think the more culture we'll find. I hope so anyway.
We hope so, yeah. Places like Cuba, Central America, I think that's where it's going to be at. The Windward Islands, for us, which is the main place we've been so far, is just a little bit too touristed by people that just want to come and sit on the beach. It's not.
Exactly.
And it doesn't seem to have made much of its history, because there is a rich history. But yeah, it's difficult to find it.
There we are. So it is what it is at the moment, and that's our score so far. We will probably change it at some point. Anyway, next up, Anchorages.
The fact the wind almost always dies at night means Med anchorages are usually nice places to hang out. There are still some exposed coasts, like here in Spain, where it may be difficult to get out of the swell. But on the whole, if you're careful, you can work things out.
So that's the anchorage that we're pretty much all in now, because the wind had changed round. And I mean, the good thing about Formentera, any island really, is that you can just sort of nip round the other side of the island, because this side was where we were before, over there. And yeah, the wind just changed a little bit, got a little bit rough. So we've all come round this side, and it's lovely, isn't it? I mean, it's just
Yeah, it's beautiful.
gentle, beautiful anchorage.
Do beware of high season crowds though. July and August are good times to seek out the quieter Med spots, as far away from charter fleets as possible. If you've only ever chartered in the Med, then you haven't had the good cruising experience here. In some places like Croatia, Greece and Turkey, you will find a lot of deep water anchorages, with stern tying as the only option. It's worth getting the gear and developing the skills to do this well, as it opens up some magnificent anchorages. So as you can see, there are some great anchorages in the Med, and then there's Venice Lagoon, which is just another level. Our favourite anchorage in the Caribbean so far is this one in the Tobago Cays. It's truly stunning. We could only just squeeze in here with our 2-metre draft, but protected as it is by an enormous horseshoe reef as well as the small islands, this is one of the very few anchorages we've had without rolling. You may think being on the leeward side of a large island like St Lucia would mean you would be out of the swell. But let me tell you, a 6-foot Atlantic swell that's been rolling across an ocean for over 1,000 miles does not get stopped by the islands. It wraps around and into bays you would swear would be fully protected looking at the charts. The wind is usually offset from the wrapped around swell as well, so you'll get it on the beam. Kedge anchors are usually the only real relief. So I've surprised myself here with this one because I really did think before we came that the Caribbean would be better for anchoring than the Med, but the scoring, well, it's not worked out that way.
No, it hasn't. We've scored the Med as 3 and the Caribbean as 2. Though maybe we are being a bit mean. Who knows?
No, I think it's fair.
Anyway, all right, moving swiftly along. The next category is bureaucracy. And that is a factor. You spend a lot of times when you're sailing, checking in, checking out of countries, sorting out the different admin. And yeah, we thought it was worth a category all on its own. In Europe, some places are really simple, but some are a complete nightmare. You may remember our encounter with the customs police in Croatia. They just wanted to fine us in cash. That's just what they're like.
Because we will make a formal complaint, obviously.
I should say at this point that this fine is made up. It's not in the law, and the police change their story several times when we ask exactly what we're supposed to have done wrong. In Greece, the bureaucracy is time-consuming and can be expensive, depending on the customs official.
So that's it, we're all done. Slightly difficult lady in the ports police, but there's always one.
But there are some better countries. Malta, for instance. The customs official is on the dock and ready to stamp your boat papers, not your passport, which makes all the difference to those of us not in Schengen. A quick word on Schengen. All these countries are inside the Schengen zone. That means that once you check into one of these countries, you can travel for 90 days out of 180 anywhere inside the zone. But if you're not native to one of the countries, after 90 days you have to leave the zone completely for another 90 days in order to reset the clock. This is what's known as the Schengen Shuffle, and it's why we've spent time in Montenegro and Turkey, and others have visited Morocco or Tunisia. Some countries have bilateral agreements to stay longer, Australia and Italy, for instance, and it's a good idea to check these things out when you come. When we arrived in the Caribbean, some told us all this bureaucracy would be left behind. They were wrong.
We have arrived in Trinidad.
It took us 2 days to check into Trinidad and another whole day to check in to Curacao.
That's immigration, and then back here for customs on this side. They don't make it easy.
So far, no check-in can be described as easy. And if you turn up at an office after 4 p.m, you will almost certainly receive a fine.
And the thing you've got to work out about Beckway is that they're open till 6. It says they're all open till 6. The official hours are till 4. So if you come, as we did, at 4:30, you get charged a lot of money for overtime. So that's a mistake. I'll do that again.
Don't do that again.
So again, I've surprised myself here, I think, in that I really did think before we came to the Med, because of what we'd heard, that it's much easier to check into countries than it is in Europe, and that's just not been the case. It's not been
No, it hasn't. Even SailClear, which is the online check-in, only actually works if the computers are working in the country concerned.
Yeah.
And that hasn't always been the case. So it's just been very sporadic, really, and long waits.
Yeah, the French islands are supposed to be much easier. We haven't
Yeah.
been to them yet there. So, but yeah, everywhere else been tricky. Even
Yeah.
here.
I think it's always tricky. I mean, whenever I think of immigration now, the hairs go up at the back of my neck and I'm like, oh, I'm dreading it. Anyway, so it's 2 for the Med and 2 for the Caribbean.
Yeah, both low scores, because
Yeah.
they're not making it easy for anyone. No one is.
No, exactly. And it can be quite expensive if you do have tourist taxes and other fees that might be added. Which brings us to the next category, which is the cost. In the Caribbean, food is expensive. Car hire is expensive. Insurance is expensive. Everything is expensive because most tourists who come here are on holiday for 1 or 2 weeks. So they pay and go. And quite frankly, that's how people who live here make their money, from tourism. However, if you stay here for years on your boat, then the cost all adds up. In contrast, in the Med, food is less expensive. We hired a car in Spain for €3 a day in low season, and often sightseeing is for free, or you pay a very low entrance fee, because not everyone here is on holiday. You will need to pay those marina fees in the winter, and maybe in summer too if the weather gets bad. And you'll probably end up motoring when the wind drops. This is what it looks like when you are totally becalmed. So you'll be spending more money on fuel. So looking at all those different ways of spending your money, we reckon that over the year, it's pretty equal. So we said the Med 3 and the Caribbean 3.
Yeah, so let's add up, do a bit of addition then. We'll put it on screen to find out what the score is so far before the last category. And the Med's just got its nose ahead.
It is, but it's pretty even. So the last category could be a decider. And that's an important one for us because it is proximity to family and friends and the ease of which it is to keep in touch. And,
Which obviously depends on who you are, where your family is and where you're sailing. So, yeah, particular to each person. Go.
When we left the UK, one of the first lengthy stops we made was in Cartagena, and our whole family came out for a visit. Flights were affordable, and we took an Airbnb for added space. Then COVID hit, and for a long time, none of us could travel. I think that made us appreciate all the more when family could come and see us, and we could go home for a visit. The last big family holiday we had was in the Canaries last Christmas before we crossed the Atlantic. Inland, there are lovely little towns like Fergas, one of our favourites. Yeah, we're going to follow it from all the way up there. Yes, we have grandsons. Now we're in the Caribbean, it's more difficult for family to come, with costs being hiked in the school holidays and work schedules making it difficult for our daughters to take time out for a longer period away. We had a great holiday with Millie in St Lucia and the Grenadines, and it had to be special. This is too far to come for an impromptu long weekend. So while the quality of a holiday in the Caribbean is excellent, the proximity to the UK is a factor for us when it comes to this category. So this final category is very personal, and we scored the Med 4 and the Caribbean 1. But of course it would be very different if you live somewhere else.
Yes, for us in the Med, very easy to get back to,
Yeah.
and for family and friends to come over and see us there, not so much here. And if we went to the South Pacific, much more difficult again. And I think it sort of depends on what boat you have as well. I mean,
Yeah.
if we had a bigger boat, a catamaran maybe,
Yeah.
then, family can come and stay on board. It might be easier for that to happen. For us, the boat's not big enough for that. So really, being in the Med's much easier. We
Yeah.
hire an Airbnb or something like that, and people come backwards and forwards.
And of course some people are taking their family with them when they go sailing, and that gives it a completely different spin. So yeah, the last category is important to anyone who's thinking about going sailing, but that's how it landed with us. So
We're back to the wind category
We are.
of the Caribbean now. It's going to blow us away. So before it blows the scores away, here's the final tally. Of course, the last one, family and friends, will swap around for your locations. And of course, not all categories are necessarily equal. If the whole reason for you going cruising is to enjoy the diving and water sports, this category might be worth more than 5. And if you don't care about land activities and culture, then that category might be worth less.
Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to our patrons, thank you to our subscribers, and thank you. And we'll be back next week with another look at the Caribbean, which is where we are now.